The wind howled outside the cabin like a wounded beast, clawing at the wooden walls and rattling the shutters. Rain poured down in relentless sheets, drumming against the roof as lightning flashed across the endless prairie. Inside, the fire crackled and hissed, throwing long, flickering shadows across the room. She sat by the hearth, trembling, not from the cold, but from everything she'd run from. Her hands shook as she tried to hold the rough wool blanket around her shoulders. Her dress was still damp, her eyes hollow from the road. The world had been cruel to her, and tonight, it felt as though it had finally broken her. The door creaked open, and the scent of rain and saddle leather filled the room. A man stepped inside, a tall, broad-shouldered cowboy, the brim of his hat dripping with rainwater. He closed the door softly behind him, his boots echoing against the wooden floor. For a long moment he said nothing, only stared at her with a kind of quiet understanding that needed no words. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said finally, his voice deep, edged with weariness. "Saw the light. Didn't figure anyone would be out here in a storm like this." She didn't answer. Her fingers tightened around the blanket as if it were armor. He took off his hat, set it on the table near the fire, and poured himself a small measure of whiskey from the bottle waiting there. Then, without asking, he poured another glass and placed it gently near her on the table. "You look like you need it more than I do," he murmured. Her lips parted, but no words came. She just stared into the flames, her tears glistening in the firelight. The silence stretched between them, fragile as glass. He watched her for a moment longer, then knelt down beside her. "You ain't got to say a word," he said softly. "Not tonight. You've run far enough." That was when something in her broke. A sob tore through her chest, and she clutched the parchment in her hands, its edges crumpled, its words written in shaking ink. She didn't show him what it said. She didn't have to. The man reached out, his rough, calloused hand brushing against her trembling fingers. "You're safe here," he said. "I'll make sure of that." Outside, thunder rolled across the plains, but inside, the world grew still. For the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself lean into someone's arms. The firelight wrapped around them both, and in that fragile moment, two broken souls began to remember what warmth felt like. The storm had quieted by morning, leaving the prairie veiled in mist. The light that filtered through the cabin window was soft, hesitant, like the dawn itself wasn't sure it belonged there. The smell of wood smoke and whiskey hung in the air, and the fire had burned down to glowing embers. He was already awake, sitting by the fire, his hat resting on his knee, his revolver holstered but never far. He'd been up for hours, watching over her as she slept curled beneath the wool blanket on the couch. Her face, finally calm, looked younger than it had last night. Too young for the weight she carried. When she stirred, he turned slightly, the chair creaking. She blinked at the dim light, her eyes red but softer than before. For a moment she looked lost, like she'd forgotten where she was. Then she saw him. "You stayed," she whispered. He nodded. "Couldn't leave you out here alone. Not after what I saw in your eyes." She sat up slowly, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. "You don't even know my name." "I don't need to," he said. "Sometimes names make it harder. People remember you better that way, and I got too many ghosts already." The silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It was thick with unspoken things, grief, guilt, gratitude. She stood, bare feet touching the cold wood floor, and walked to the table where the parchment lay. The ink had smudged from her tears, but a few words still remained visible. He caught sight of it before she could hide it. "Don't stop. I need this," he read quietly, his brow furrowing. "You wrote that last night." She swallowed hard, her voice shaking. "It wasn't for you. It was for me. I needed to remind myself that sometimes it's okay to want to keep living." He didn't speak. He just looked at her, his jaw tightening as if holding back everything he wanted to say. Finally he rose, walked over, and stood beside her. "Who did this to you?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "It doesn't matter. I'm gone now." He stepped closer. "It matters to me." Her eyes lifted to his, haunted, searching. "Why?" He hesitated, his voice low. "Because I've seen that look before. The kind that says someone took everything from you and left you breathing, just so you'd feel it longer. I don't want that for you." Her hands trembled, but she didn't pull away when he reached out and took them in his. His touch was steady, grounding like the earth after a storm. She finally whispered, "What's your name?" He smiled faintly, the first time she'd seen him do so. "Call me Colt." Colt. She repeated the name like it was a promise, soft and hesitant. The fire popped, and the silence between them felt different now, warmer, fragile but alive. He poured 2 cups of coffee from the kettle over the fire, handed her one, and sat across from her. "You can stay here till you figure out what's next," he said. "No one will find you out here. Not unless you want to be found." Her eyes shimmered again, but this time the tears were different. "Thank you," she whispered. Colt nodded once. "Don't thank me yet. Just heal." Outside, the clouds began to part, and sunlight spilled through the window, casting long golden rays across the cabin floor. For the first time in years, she didn't flinch at the light. She closed her eyes and let it touch her face. Colt watched her in silence, the warmth of the fire reflecting in his eyes. Somewhere deep down, he knew whatever road lay ahead for the both of them, it had already begun here, on this quiet,